Well, good morning and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're located. And thank you for joining us for this next session, which is all about the free trade agreement that's unfolding as we speak. I hope you enjoyed that last regulatory session. I thought that was just absolutely outstanding. There was so much solid, good quality information there from literally the people that are making decisions that you'll be working with in the future. So well done, the regulators. So you can see how accessible they've become over the last little while since really since the Royal Commission and the work that's gone into improving the financial services sector. So now we've got a great panel, but before I introduce the panel, I just wanted to see if we can have Claire Marriott join us. Now, Claire Marriott is the Managing Director of Newfound here in the APAC region. She's just got a few words of thanks and welcome to say before we go into this free trade agreement. And I also wanted to say, Claire, what a magnificent team you've got at Newfound with yourself, Liz Wood, and also the marvellous Luli, who's been working on this event since March, since the COVID crisis. It's really an outstanding virtual event. A lot goes into this. So Claire, thank you for bringing this together. Over to you.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. And thank you to you as well for being MC. But you're absolutely right. You know, it's been an adventure since March, and we're so proud of the people that we've put together. And of course, that includes the speakers and the panelists tonight. And thank you, Kathy, for looking after that session. You know, like Andrew said, it's not easy to get to speak to people like this, if at all you can. So amazing and very rich information. So thank you. And I also want to thank the speakers and Justin and the panelists tonight. They're going to be talking about the free trade agreement and how this is going to really enhance the fintechs that are going into the UK, coming into Australia and New Zealand. And, you know, we're really excited to hear from them, and we're really grateful for their time. So thank you to you all, and enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. So as I've said in the last session, attendees, please get involved by putting questions through the chat function. We'll weave them into the conversation, particularly in the second half of the panel. We've got over an hour to discuss this free trade agreement, but we love to get your questions into the discussion, and this is how you can make the most of these valuable speakers. So now I'm going to introduce you to Justin Howden. Justin is the Group Head, Global Government Affairs and Industry Development for the H&H Group. Welcome, Justin. It's great to see you here. And Justin's going to open by introducing the panel discussion. He's going to chair the session, and then we'll bring questions in later. Over to you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much, Claire, and everybody at Newfound for the great arrangements, and all the attendees. We're really looking forward to a good interactive session. If I could first introduce David McCready, the CEO of the Australia-British Chamber of Commerce. David is a trusted advisor to government and a wide range of businesses, providing him with a unique insight across numerous sectors. His ability to gain cut-through and share insights into the opportunities for businesses to perform better, to grow, and to reach the right markets and channels in the UK has made him a key asset to the many companies that he's worked with, and certainly as a member of the ABCC, a great asset for us in our development. Thanks, David. If I could then introduce Michael Ward, Consul General and Deputy Trade Commissioner for Asia Pacific ANZ at Department of International Trade. Hi, Michael. Michael's a career diplomat who specialises in helping UK exporters grow globally and foreign direct investors succeed in the UK by connecting them up with advice and support across government and resolving any issues that they face. He brings highly developed skills in working with major corporates, leading change, policy making and delivery, creative thinking, advocacy and service delivery from working in central government in the UK, and also as a British diplomat overseas in Australia, France, Hungary, the EU, Brussels and Turkey. What a great mix that is. And certainly last but not least, Dan Tebbett, the Head of Investment, Assistant General Manager at Austrade. There he is, Dan. Dan's driven by a global mindset and 25 years plus of international experience. Dan harnesses people, processes and passion to deliver creative solutions at the confluence of commercial and public policy challenges. Dan's a leader focused on implementation and results, leveraging strategic talent, exceptional communication skills, which I'll come back to shortly, and diverse international commercial experience. Now, I've also had the personal luck and experience of dealing directly with Dan when he was in the embassy in Beijing, and we were developing a lot of business there. And I certainly cannot recommend Dan's experience more highly. So whether you're going north, UK, whichever way, Dan is a fantastic resource to tap into, as is Michael on the UK side and David as the ABCC bridge. So I thought, given that we are, unfortunately from the Australia side, we lost the last cricket series in England just recently. We're about to have another go with a one-day series. So I thought, to decide who's going to open the batting, I'll toss a coin. I'm really going to toss a coin. And it will be out of Dan or Michael. And David, you can come in and bat number 3 like Ricky Ponting. So Michael, would you like to call? Mute.
Yeah, heads.
And a tails it is. So Dan, if you wouldn't mind, we'll go to the first question with you. And then we'll follow up with you, Michael, and then to you, David, as number 3. Dan, Australia's been seen for a long time as a great food, wine, tourism, and also hard commodities source, not really the sophisticated services economy that we really are. I'm just wondering, how does Austrade address changing that perception in the European and the UK markets?
Thanks, Justin. And obviously, there's a bit of movement in the wicket with that tough first question. But thank you for the question. But look, the question you've raised, it is quite a common misperception about Australia. Having worked the last 7 or 8 years in Asia and the last 15 years abroad, people think about Australia traditionally as a superpower in mining and agriculture. But actually, if you look at the data, those things, absolutely the pillars of our economy, but their contribution to GDP is each less than 10%. Australia, like most highly advanced economies around the world, services contribute more than 70% of our GDP. Mining and agriculture continue to be our long-standing advantages, but they're actually much smaller than the sophisticated services economy. Services employ 4 out of every 5 jobs in the Australian economy, which is particularly important in the current circumstances. And certainly a number of those service industries in Australia are very hard hit by the COVID economic factor, particularly in tourism, particularly in education. Very few people possibly realise that the financial services sector in Australia is actually our largest single sector of our economy, accounting for $140 billion of GDP and employing almost 500,000 people, around about 6% of the workforce. These are obviously pre-COVID numbers. But I guess one issue there, and an issue that's for the agenda today, the export contribution from services in general is much lower than the share of GDP, and that's a challenge that successive governments have been grappling with, how to increase the export share. And we certainly seek the help of people on this call today to help change that. Financial services is absolutely critical to the Australian economy. Our big 4 banks are actually some of the strongest and largest in the world. They're absolute pillars of the economy. They withstood the global financial crisis a decade or more ago, and so far they're standing strong through the COVID crisis, thanks to very strong management, deep reserves of capital, and a really effective prudential regulatory environment. But as we all know, banks are quite ripe for disruption globally through challenger banks, as well as fintechs who are bringing new products and services that can delight consumers. As Minister Hume said at the opening event earlier in the week, Australia is very much focused on enhancing choice for consumers and encouraging innovation in our financial services sector. And as the Minister said, there are 3 key elements to that. One of which is the consumer data right, the legislation that helps to open up the banking sector, but as the Minister said, also other sectors by making it easier to match products, compare products and switch products. Australia was a very early mover, for example, in mobile number portability. We introduced that more than 20 years ago to make it really easy to switch mobile phone providers and let people shop around. And we see that innovation throughout the economy, for example, in a very well-known example of using blockchain technologies to empower people to make easier choices in the electricity sector. So that's pillar number one. Open banking is obviously another pillar of the economy, and I think that that's something that Michael will talk about as an area where we see great potential for closer cooperation between the UK and Australia. And the third element is the enhanced regulatory sandbox, which I think the last session has probably talked about in some depth, but that is now live and operational since the start of this month. And that really brings fantastic impetus for fintechs around the world to come to Australia to bring their products and solutions and experiment in an environment that is regulated by our company's regulator, but also provides a great deal of license for innovation. So, Justin, I guess to answer your question eventually, how does Austrade go about changing perceptions, as Australia is, heard many funny descriptions over the years about being a tropical theme park with funny animals and things like that when I was working in places like Russia. I guess we change those perceptions in the Australian way by living up to our words with our deeds, and also maintaining our irrepressible sense of optimism through the face of any challenge. Obviously, it's been a challenging year for everyone around the world with COVID, but if we can all think back 8 or 9 months, we also faced a particularly challenging summer here with the bushfires in Australia, which were one of the historic challenges of our nation. Australia is obviously always very happy to work closely with our mates, be they from the UK or across the Tasman, or indeed places where they speak funny varieties of English, such as the US and Canada, or even places where they speak very little English at all. And of course, I'm thinking of places like China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Singapore, where Australia has just concluded the new agreement on digital trade, which covers fintech and regtech. We're a very strong and multicultural nation. We're very proud of that multicultural heritage. We have a strong network of free trade agreements, the topic for today, covering our major trading partners. Our FTAs currently cover 76% of our trade, and we hope that in the very near future, we will extend that coverage to the UK and the European Union as well. So Austrade, with our global network, including our fantastic team in London that I was managing, had the honour to manage for some of last year. We stand ready to work with fintechs. We work very closely through our partnership with the Department of International Trade through the Fintech Bridge, and we're very excited about making some of those things better known and building the reality.
Thanks very much, Dan. Great answer. Thank you so much. Michael, if I could cross to you now. The UK's been part of the EU for decades now, and in the next few years will still be part of Europe, but not necessarily the EU. The city remains one of the great financial centres irrespective on the planet. Can you talk us through your thoughts on the financial leaders of the city and what they're thinking as to the innovation opportunities that these new horizons might bring?
Yeah, thanks, Justin, and thanks, Dan. I'm glad you set out the case so clearly. I mean, it's not bad to be recognised for the traditional products, but your friends know you for the quality of your services as well. So I think it was very well put, if I may say so. Justin, you're asking me as a public servant of several decades to put my mind in those of a financier in the city, which is obviously a very hard thing for me to do, but I'll do my best. Look, I think what's behind your question is absolutely right. Look, London will remain a preeminent financial centre in the world and the preeminent financial centre in Europe. And so, in the current phase of our history, there's everything to play for globally as we leave the European Union. I should stress we're leaving the European Union, we're not leaving Europe. Europe will remain a really important market for financial services, and that is reflected in the conversations going on with the EU over a future free trade agreement and issues around financial services and equivalence and all that. So let's not forget that. But the globe has opened up in a way that it hasn't been available to us as a sovereign nation to negotiate improved access, improved arrangements with partners. And this is a key sector, obviously, for the UK. Not only is it a major part UK GDP, but something like nearly 20% of UK exports are in financial services, and it's obviously an area where we have a substantial surplus. It's an industry that employs something like 2.3 million people. So yeah, it is a magnet for talent, for innovation, for tech, obviously, which we'll talk about, and capital. You know, what will be going through the minds of the financial institutions, large and small, is, okay, how can I have a piece of that? How can I get a piece of that? How can I get a piece of the action that the government has pledged to get for the country in making sure that 80% of our trade is covered by free trade agreements in the future, a substantial increase? How do we make the most out of a concerted effort to develop a stronger footprint in the Asia-Pacific, indeed the Indo-Pacific? So I mean, that's what's be going through their minds, and they'll be thinking about the FTAs, which I'll come on to in a second. They'll be thinking about the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is, you know, something like 13% of global GDP. So they'll want a piece of that. And of course, Australia is a big part of that as well. It's one of our closest partners for all the reasons we know. I don't need to rehearse those, but it is important. And financial services is an important part of that relationship. Our exports are something around 800 million a year in financial services. You know, increasing bit of that is around tech, which we'll talk about. The UK is the second largest overseas investor in Australia, and a lot of that is capital flows. So, you know, we are incredibly closely enmeshed in terms of our tradable finance, if you like. So that's a really important part of the world. So they'll be wanting, I'm talking about the financiers now, they want to see how do we improve that? You know, we're doing pretty well, but how do we do that? And that's where the FTA will come in. Negotiations are underway. We're obviously at a relatively early stage of those, with the next round later this month. But they'll be looking at the sorts of issues that they want to see resolved in a free trade agreement. And we'll resolve some of them, probably not all of them. That's the nature of these things. But around, you know, things like bank licensing, the cost of business of some of the regulatory issues, which I'm sure you've talked about in the previous session. You know, access to the new payment system, issues around investment thresholds through the Financial Investment Review Board, those sorts of things. And I can commend an excellent piece of work that the City of London itself commissioned on, you know, issues in cross-border services that UK businesses are interested in looking at and discussing as part of this. Easily Googleable. If you type City of London, Australia, it'll come up. And it's a really interesting report that goes through some of these issues. So that, you know, that sort of sets the agenda, both for the FTA, which, you know, obviously we're talking about the detail of that. You know, early stages can't, you know, I don't know how far we get on that. We hope we'll do well. But that's a conversation that's you know, quite long term. There's all sorts of issues that we can resolve in parallel, you know, through mutual recognition arrangements, all that sort of thing. I think that's the sort of things I hope is going through their minds. I can't speak for them directly, but if I were them, that's what I'd be thinking anyway.
Michael, thank you very much. That's a really good encapsulation of what they are likely to be thinking. And if we needed to get anybody to interpret that, you are the man on the ground, and I'm sure that's exactly what they're thinking. David, if I go across to you, how can Australia and the UK, most importantly the businesses, particularly small to medium businesses from both countries, so it's not necessarily one advantage for the other, how can both sides really benefit from what we're talking about in fintech through the FTA and the negotiations?
Yeah, look, thanks, Justin, and thank you, Michael and Dan, for paving the way. It's good to hear a very unified sort of presence from either side. Look, the opportunities are vast, really, in both directions. We've seen, particularly since the institution of the FinTech Bridge a few years ago, but, you know, going back before that as well, there are plenty of pioneers before the bridge existed that swam the river, so to speak, to find their opportunities in each other's markets. I think the really great thing that the opportunity of the FTA and the opportunity of our future beyond the FTA actually is the opportunity for us to work together collaboratively on the iterative learnings that we are going to see as regulation needs to be reformed, as we look at new technology coming into the market, and the opportunities for businesses of all sizes, but particularly those that are innovative and have answers for problems that particularly the larger financial institutions have, be that as a competitor to those institutions or to resolve and help those institutions themselves reform. There's a great opportunity there for companies in both directions. And when we think about the regulatory framework, we can see that happening already. We watched the UK start with open banking. We've now got a consumer data right. People in the UK are already talking about, well, hey, look, that's the next step on from where we are. Where do we take our next step? So the opportunity for a very symbiotic relationship between the two countries will only be getting stronger as we go forward. I'm sure the regulators probably spoke a bit about that in the last session, so I won't sort of dwell on that for too long. But I think the other thing is, and Michael sort of touched on the fact that there are so many things that we have in common that do allow us so easily to blend in when we go to another country or go to the UK from Australia or when UK firms come here. And the regulatory settings is a large part of that, particularly in the financial services space. And I think as we bed in this sandbox that's only just recently opened, the new and improved version, I think as long as we're supporting that well from an Australian government perspective, I think the FCA does a wonderful job in the UK, welcoming Australian firms going there. There'll only be more opportunities to come. And we've already seen some great organisations coming here using the bridge like Revolut. RateSetter started here. They're about to list on the Australian Stock Exchange, the Australian version of RateSetter. They're now called Plenty with an I. So there are lots of great examples already out there in the market. And I think it just takes a little bit of research, a little bit of thought, using the likes of Austrade and DIT, and dare I say it, even ourselves at the Chamber, to help pull together what the opportunity looks like, connect you with the right people, help you find that business opportunity, and then to just go after it.
Thanks very much. That's a great response. Michael, if I could cross back to you, one thing that I'm really intrigued about is, so you've got the City of London, which is this immense, fantastic global leader in financial services. So there's obviously a set of capabilities and capacities there. But what's different about London that makes it so vibrant in the fintech side, generating so many of these new technologies, new startups, scale-ups? What's really all that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't think there's a single sort of magic ingredient there. I think there's sort of essentially I guess three things I'll mention very briefly. Firstly, there's an issue of scale where London, and not just London, I should hasten to add, this is obviously fintech can operate anywhere and doesn't have to be stuck in the square mile. Nothing wrong with being stuck in the square mile, but I think sort of scale. So we reckon that the fintech industry is worth about 7 billion to the UK economy, and it's employing about 77,000 people. So that's really quite a big ecosystem. So you've got scale, with scale comes a large number of successful growing companies. And I think we've got. I am reliably informed. One always can challenge these statistics, but we believe we've got the most fintech unicorns certainly in Europe, and compared with most places in the States and in Asia. So I think we have 19 now. I think the second key ingredient is capital, the ability to raise capital. Fundraising is really significant in the sector. Something like 15 billion was invested over in, I think the most reliable numbers we have is 2018. And venture capital has become a really big player, which is venture capital is obviously not as big as in the States, but it's the venture capital scene in London is far bigger than anywhere else in Europe. So that's feeding that scale. And I think the other element of this, which is feeding innovation, is take up by consumers of innovation. 70% of digitally active adults, I don't know how you define digitally active adults, but anyway, take that at face value, are now using the services of a fintech firm, and that level of take up is higher than pretty well anywhere else in the world. It is a bit higher than Australia, which is about 10 or so points behind that, but still very good. So I think there's a combination of factors. David mentioned open banking. I don't need to dwell on that, but it is proving to be a very important driver of innovation for very obvious reasons. So anyway, there's 3.5, 4 things that give you a sense of why this is such a vibrant sector in the UK.
Fantastic, thank you, Michael. Dan, can I cross across to you now? We've heard a lot about the 2 different markets, the 2 different countries, regulations, the settings. David's talked about the opportunity for small to medium businesses. I wonder, with your background, have you got an example of one you could talk us through, what that would look like?
Mute. Oh, I'm mute. Had to be someone who did that. Sorry, an example in which direction, Justin? Oh. No, you're on mute.
I think we've just both been bold. So an example of a local business here in Australia, whether Austrade's helped or not, but something to sort of bring into relief what that really looks like in actioning what might happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the most exciting sectors in Australia in fintech is the BNPL sector, right? Which is an acronym I've only learned this week. I thought it was a French bank, but the buy now, pay later sector is obviously extremely hot in Australia. We obviously have 2 big local players in Afterpay and Zip, but I think earlier this week we saw a US firm, Zebit, coming to list in the Australian market, and a New Zealand firm, Laybuy, misspelt or funny spelling as usual, coming to list in the market. So it's really interesting to see. The ASX market it's certainly not as broad as London or New York in many ways, but it tends to have some really strong spots. Obviously, the big banks are dominant, mining companies and small cap mining. It's always been very strong. It's actually always been quite strong in biotechnology, and I think we're going to we appear to be developing some niche expertise in particularly buy now, pay later, but we'd hope that may expand into other types of fintechs over time as well. There's some of the ones that mention. I mean, obviously, Justin, as you know, from working in China so extensively, it's also really interesting to see Australian companies who are involved in helping bridge the WeChat Pay and Alipay platforms into Western markets, which is not as simple as it could be. But we've had a relatively supportive environment. That's something that I was heavily involved in my time in Beijing, was getting Reserve Bank and other regulators actually aware of, frankly, of what was going on, the scale of those mobile phone-based payment platforms, which, frankly, I haven't seen anything like it anywhere else in the world in terms of the scale and penetration. Literally, I tell a story. I went on a 1-week trip in China and I forgot to take my bank card, and I had 300 RMB in my wallet, about $60. I still had 100 left at the end of the week because I'd paid everything with my phone. The level of penetration there is enormous. Obviously, in Australia, we have a huge Chinese tourism sector, at least pre-COVID, huge Chinese tourism sector. For me, it was really critical to help expand the acceptance of those, the preferred way that Chinese people want to pay. So I think it's just a good example of the fact that the Australian market is quite open, quite flexible to responding. I did a product placement for you earlier, Justin, before we started, but one company that obviously we have to be sensitive to our clients' confidentiality, but one company that Austrade has helped, and we have a case study on our website about is TransferWise. And I guess I come out of the software industry back in the 90s and so on, and there's always this expression about eating your own dog food. So I want to show my TransferWise credit card, which actually I bought. I wasn't personally involved in the assistance Austrade gave to TransferWise. I just discovered it separately as a great platform. And you know, there are many others. I'm not meaning to endorse one product over another, but it's a really dynamic environment. And I think the fact that we've got frankly, it's quite unique, the relationship that we have between Austrade and DIT, that we can essentially provide a full service in both directions. So Australian companies looking to invest in the UK are the inwards investors that DIT absolutely wants to help, and UK companies wanting to come to Australia are the inwards investors that we want to help. So I think there's an incredible synergy there, and having that formalised through the FinTech bridge and hopefully enhanced through the FTA. We look forward to that.
Thanks, Dan. David, I'll cross to you now. Maybe we pick up a little bit of the ABCC's remit. Just interested in case studies that you might have of either an Aussie business you've helped go out or a UK business you've helped come in.
Yeah, look, we've helped numerous over the years in different ways. And I might just pick up on a couple of things actually that Michael and Dan mentioned. The City of London report, just to plug the chamber, you can find it really easily on our website. There's a link to it. It takes you back to the City of London page. But if you just go to britishchamber.com, there's a bar at the top, the menu bar. It's in the last thing on the right, which says, I think, Brexit, FTAs, and submissions and other things. And there's a bunch of reports actually that we've partnered with the City of London over a number of years. And we were pleased to formally launch that report with Jane Hume and Senator Hume and the Lord Mayor of the City of London a little while ago. So it is really worth reading. And the second thing I'd say, in terms of listing in Australia, one of the great things that's happened in recent times is the ASX actually setting up their own tech listing platform, which really gives us a new direction, a bit of focus, and a place for investors who want to invest in this space to really go look for quality stocks. And I think there are plenty on there. As I mentioned earlier, Rate Centre, who are now plenty, they're certainly one organisation that we had a lot to do with when they first came over to Australia. In fact, one of my colleagues, Paul Wright, actually worked there before he came over to us. So that's how close we were with them during that process. We've done various pieces of work. I think it's always hard for us to claim a piece of work. We much prefer to work with our partners, with Austrade, with DIT, but at the end of the day, it really is up to the companies themselves to, as I said it probably in the answer to the first question, to actually just get out there and have a crack. And I really encourage you everybody on the call to have a go. Getting into the UK, to be honest, it's so easy comparatively. And I know we're working really hard at the Australian end to make this a much more attractive offer here. But the FCA really, I have to take my hats off to them. They do a really great job of welcoming companies in. DIT are fantastic at getting you right in front of the right person to speak to about what your proposition is. There's a great network. And as Michael was alluding to earlier, the network in London, because the size of the fintech investment there, and to keep in mind too, and I think, there's a couple of comments around the square mile, and I know that Michael, if he moves his head slightly, you'll see the freedom of the City of London sitting on his wall behind him. But so it's not a paid position, I might add, but he'll definitely always support the square mile. But there's great opportunities around the UK, be that in places like Leeds or in the Northwest. Northern Ireland has a fantastic cybersecurity space. Computershare, who are originally out of Victoria, we gave quite a bit of support a few years ago when they put in a big investment into Scotland, in Edinburgh. So there's great stuff going on all the time. And I think the important thing that we think about is not just the initial investment, but once having made that initial investment, how we can then support them beyond that initial entry, particularly into the Australian market. And our colleagues over in the UK at the Australian UK Chamber of Commerce, which is our sister business, do a really good job of that support afterwards. So helping you build the networks, helping you get in front of the people, once you've already made that first move, to do that to help with that next stage of development and growth.
Thanks very much. And Dan, can I just cross back to you to sort of follow on from that as well? You talked before about the tremendous range of free trade agreements that Australia has out of Australia into the region, Indo-Pacific, across Asia. Have you seen any expression of interest in businesses from the UK so far coming to Australia, not just to address the Australian market, but sort of use us as a jumping off spot for Asia and the other areas under our other FTAs?
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. I think it's one of the strongest elements of the Why Australia story, as we call it, is Australia as a foothold in the Asia Pacific, and as you said, the Indo Pacific. Each market in the region offers something a little bit different, right? You know, if you're driven by very low taxes, for example, you may go to another jurisdiction. If you're looking for, you know, extensive computer programming skills at a reasonable price, you may go to another market as well. But Australia offers, you know, a really strong workforce, really advanced infrastructure, as we've talked about, very strong regulatory environment, but we also offer an incredible network of free trade agreements that underpin market access and you know, preferential tariffs. It's obviously potentially less of an issue in terms of financial technologies, but for many product-related exporters who want to come into the region, it's a really big motivating factor. And you know, Justin, as you know from the work we've done together in places like China, we've seen the impact of FTAs, right? Particularly on products subject to tariffs, the impact of those tariffs falling is unmistakable. Sometimes it goes a little bit too fast, too quickly for some countries, you know, but we've seen incredible advances in terms of trade and market access between Australia and China that I've had the most familiarity with, but particularly in other markets in Japan, Korea, our relationship with ASEAN. Michael mentioned the unpronounceable CPTPP, which brings together economies throughout the Asia Pacific, and we're delighted that the UK has rediscovered its roots in the Pacific and potentially could join CPTPP in the future. I think that there would be a lot of merit in that. So it's, you know, FTAs I think are fundamental, but you know, the other thing to remember is FTAs of course do not solve everything. They do not necessarily guarantee market access, as Justin, you have a lot of familiarity with. And you know, they usually have safeguards built into them, and you know, they typically provide a freer framework for trade, but trade is always a highly regulated activity. There always are some rules around that. So I think certainly we see, you know, Australia's workforce and natural resources and FTAs are some of the critical factors that investors look at.
Thanks very much, Dan. Appreciate that. Michael, just crossing back to you, I'm just interested in, so Australia and the UK share such common heritage, frameworks, legal, civil and civic society. We have slightly different standards in different sectors, all still trying to do the same thing in quality, safety, consumer protection, all the right things that we like our high standard economies to do. Do you see there being more commonality than difference, even though there's differences? There's more commonality that we're able to navigate through the trade agreement. Obviously, we're not asking you about the trade agreement, but the fact that the two high standards economies are both trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good point. I think the key point to remember is, look, you know, it is the sort of closeness and the similarity of our mindsets when it comes to rule setting. Now, inevitably, we have slightly different standards and different ways of going about this, as any two jurisdictions would. But the fact is, we want the same outcomes. You know, we really, really care about the quality of our consumer protection in financial services as much as in food. So we want the same outcomes. And this is quite important, as people that follow these things will know. This is quite an important feature of our conversation with the European Union, is that, you know, there is a difference between standardizing everything and you know, effectively having the same rules and agreeing to respect each other's rules. Now, it probably comes as no surprise to you that the UK is very much in favour of, you know, sovereign choice to respect other people's rules through mutual recognition. I mean, that's essentially our approach. So, those are the sorts of approaches we want to see. I mean, look, there's a myriad of different solutions one can find in the complexities and the legal text of an FTA, but that is our sort of mindset. And I think that is Australia's mindset as well. And some of it's very complicated. Of course, financial services is an inherently very, very complicated area, and it's incumbent upon our two treasuries, our regulators, to talk to each other to work their way through that complexity, because we all want the same outcomes, to find the right, slightly technical solutions, not very exciting stuff for a call like this, but I think it's eminently doable, even at fast pace, because we want the same thing. So we're not going to disagree, I don't think, on the fundamentals. It's just about finding the neat solutions to solve this. So I'm very optimistic we'll find fixes for these differences, which are, after all, technical barriers to trade in a relatively minor way. I'm not going to overblow this, but that's what trade agreements are for. It's to try and smooth the way, reduce the costs of business, de-risk, and so on and so forth. And if I may just make up a final point, so pick up on what Dan was saying, absolutely, that is a really important part of the narrative is, for us in terms of Australasia is Australia and indeed New Zealand's connectedness through free trade and other traditional links with the country of the region. And so there's a big job, I think, for us to do to persuade and encourage UK companies to look at that opportunity to come here and invest. And also the other point about an FTA is that it's not just about all the techie stuff and solving all these things I've just been talking about. It's also raising the profile of the opportunity. We have a lot of, a disproportionately high amount of trade. It's a very open trading relationship. We have something like 13,500 SMEs that export to Australia. Well, there's a lot more SMEs in the UK than 13,000. So, the fact is, if we can get the message across to SMEs and other mid-sized companies who might want to come invest, that this is a great place to come and do business, not only within Australia but also in the region, then it's win-win.
That certainly would be win-win. That'd be fantastic. Dan, I'm just sort of conscious of time, getting ready for the Q&A. If I come to you with a sort of closer of a question, there's obviously going to be more and more need from consumers, wherever the consumers are, for innovative financial technologies and products. What have you seen from tonight and from the people that you've talked to so far through the virtual mission? Do you see the momentum continuing to grow with the UK and Australia in servicing those needs of the consumers in fintech?
Thanks, Justin. And I'm determined to torture our cricket analogy. So I was going to thank you for the gentle half tracker. And I'm conscious that we have a few Kiwis here, so I won't talk about underarms. But I mean, obviously, this conference and the hard work of Newfound is absolute testament through the immense period of uncertainty we've had since the beginning of organising this conference. We're still bringing together a healthy group of companies with a strong amount of interest. I think that bodes very well. We've obviously seen a lot of changes to people's business plans, and frankly, it would be surprising if that didn't happen. That's just the reality. We understand that there are constraints on capital. People are conserving cash. People are needing to reconsider whether they can do some things virtually or remotely in the short term. That obviously makes sense, particularly obviously given our very strong management of COVID here, and one of the key features of that is a fairly hard border regime here. So, I mean, obviously, I think there's some short-term challenges for all of us here, noting that the UK's got a few particular challenges at the moment as well at the end of summer. But the fundamentals are really strong. We are two economies that know each other very well. We have so much in common. We may use, as my English mate calls it, French measurement systems, but fundamentally we have a common law-based system with a huge degree of commonality, a lot of common expectations that underpin things. Even though we are both multicultural societies, I think we have some really strong core values that share a lot in common. And in business sense, we like doing business with each other. It's not always easy. I think, as David said correctly, it's easier, but it's never easy in international business, but it's certainly easier. We have a strong and vibrant ecosystem in Australia with around about 600 fintech companies. That's obviously a lot smaller than the UK, but allowing for population, it's a healthy approach. As I mentioned earlier, obviously we've got those three fundamentals in terms of the consumer data right, open banking, and the enhanced sandbox underpinning things. I think the other factor is the determination and experience of DIT and Austrade working together to help companies. But I actually totally agree with David. The heroes here are not the government. The heroes here are the companies. They're the ones who take the risk and get out of bed every day. And our job is just to enable that. We're seeing incredible changes in the market and quickly as a result of COVID. Obviously, reduced use of cash, use of cards. I remember, literally, I didn't spend any cash for 3 months here during COVID. I remember someone insisted on cash, and I was like, oh, let me go and try and find some. But interestingly, I just read this the other day. Credit card accounts have dropped 11% in Australia over the last year, which to me is actually, that's a sign of the fintech disruption, because COVID's driving use of cards, but people are changing their behaviours around that. So I think there's a lot of change, and we really hope to make rapid progress on a comprehensive and ambitious free trade agreement between the UK and Australia as quickly as possible. I think we're all feeling very confident that it's doable, and that we hope to make progress as quickly as we possibly can. I have to say, obviously, that we're keen to do a free trade agreement with the European Union as well, and as I think the UK would expect. But I think there's a very supportive environment for getting a deal done that we both get a lot out of with the UK. So I'm incredibly optimistic and really looking forward to the questions. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dan. Great summary. David, I'm going to throw you a curly one. If we look forward to the end of 2021, so not quite 18 months, but with everything that we've seen and you've heard and that you're aware of what's going on at the moment, paint us a picture, your ideal picture of where we are at the end of 2021, not so much about fixing all the COVID issues, but more about the trade side and the fintech side between UK and Australia.
Well, to continue Dan's theory of torturing a cricket analogy a little bit further, I think we're due an Ashes series, aren't we? By next summer, I'm not quite sure. But look, I think to use it again, it's whether you use a Kookaburra or a Dukes, you're still playing cricket, and I think that's one of the underlying themes that we can always fall back on between Australia and the UK. What we can expect in the next 12 months, like what would I really like to see? I think if you look at Australia's recent digital trade agreement that we've just passing through the Parliament, hopefully unchallenged, and it seems like it will, and that's normally the way for these things in the Australian Parliament. We've got a really great deal where issues with data, where data location, freer movement of data and IP. There's a whole range of really great provisions in that agreement. And first of all, that's great for Australia right now. And over the next few months, we'll obviously look to exploit that. But I think that's the benchmark now for what we can do in this sort of space. The opportunity for underlying tech is the digital stuff. So we need to be aware of data. We need to understand privacy. We need to, what's the opt-in, opt-out? How do we deal with GDPR? Australia's non-conforming as far as GDPR goes at the moment. So we need to sort out some of those pieces. And I think the opportunity of the free trade agreement allows us to iron out some of those wrinkles. And so I think we can basically, hopefully, with the emphasis that has been placed in this sector through the FinTech Bridge, through the FTA, being able to iron out some of the things that we couldn't do until we had a free trade agreement opportunity, looking at the way that the regulators and governments are talking to each other through the FinTech Bridge. That's part of the bridge. Is not just about companies going backwards and forwards, but about government and regulators talking more often as well, trying to make that recognition and the application of rules just that much simpler between us in terms of narrowing the margins so that it's at a point where it doesn't actually matter. I mean, one of the great things that I only learnt this the other day. I was talking to Max Cunningham down at the ASX, and he told me that if you're a company listed in the UK and you want to list on the Australian Stock Exchange, you don't actually have to abide by the Australian Stock Exchange rules, because they trust that if you're listed on the London Stock Exchange, they trust their regulation. So there's opportunities that look and feel like that we can take advantage of. We can clear that path and let business do what it does best, which is go out, be innovative, create jobs, and create wealth and prosperity for our two countries.
Fantastic. What a summary. Thank you very much to the three speakers and handling that so eruditely. Andrew's going to throw us some questions, which I'm happy to sort of navigate through. Andrew?
Yes, and yeah, thanks, Justin. We've had a few questions, a couple of cheeky ones in here as well, just to, and look, we'll try and get through all of them, but I think there's a couple there that might throw you, well, let's say they might be wide of the mark. So let's start with this one. Is it possible to separate the needs and specific requirements of the financial services sector, say, from their very different but just as important requirements of, say, the agricultural or mining or other industry sectors in a free trade agreement? Is that a Dan question or is that a David question?
Michael's just unmuted himself. Do you want to have a crack at that, Michael?
Yeah, sure. Look, they're a free trade agreement. I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool trade expert, but you know, trade agreements are structured in a way to address the different needs of goods and services. You know, first point, and then within that, different sectors of goods. So you'll have something on automotive. You might have something on mining or critical minerals or whatever it might be, and then within the services space, you'll have, you know, David talked about digital, where we have a very high ambition, you know, to achieve a sort of best-in-class digital arrangements. And then the sorts of things that David and I have been mentioning around the sorts of issues that we want to address in financial services space, which get into quite specific areas, you know, some of which could be dealt with in an FTA, some of which will be done between regulators. So I think the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, it is horses for courses, and you know, whereas we might be able to persuade easier access for cars, get rid of the 5% tariff on luxury cars, or the 5% tariff on whiskey, you know, that's one thing. But then we can talk completely differently and separately about the sorts of things on financial services, whether it's around fund passporting or access to this or access to the other. I mean, they are very different things, and each bit of the negotiation is run by experts who know the business background. And if I can make this little general point, is that for people on the call, and David and the Chamber are doing a lot of work on this, you know, negotiators can only negotiate as well as the businesses that are driving behind them. You know, we can only negotiate on issues that business really care about. So absolutely is the answer to your question.
You've beautifully segued there, Michael, into the next question, which you and David might have a crack at together. And this is specifically around the superannuation sector. How does the unique but very large Australian superannuation sector internationalise, i.e. can the UK fintechs transfer their skills within an FTA agreement given our unique super sector? You understand where that question's going there, David?
Yeah, I think so. If they want to be involved in the super sector, look, the superannuation obviously is a very large pot of money. I think it's the fourth largest. Dan will shake his head if I'm wrong. The fourth largest savings pot in the world. So yeah, third largest. Sorry, thank you, Justin. I didn't know we'd gone up a rung, but when we put 9.5% of most people's wages into super every week, I'm sure it goes up at an alarmingly quick rate.
It would have to be one of the most mandated growth stories in the world, wouldn't it? Really, it's mandated to grow.
Absolutely. And look, there are a variety. Any person who's managing a large pot of money has different needs in terms of their diversification of their interests. So what we've seen certainly in a broader sense is some great support from Australian super funds in investing in the UK. If you look at the massive redevelopment urban regeneration project at King's Cross, and Australian super owns a substantive, well over 60% of that investment, the biggest urban regen project in the whole of Europe. But in terms of how they manage their money and the opportunities, probably more broadly just than superannuation as well, I think Australia's really strong wealth credentials. Look, it'll be horses for courses, and it depends on exactly what you've got to offer them as to whether or not you'll have an opportunity. But certainly, in my discussions with superannuation funds and people who are investing on behalf of superannuation funds, they're always interested to understand what's out in the marketplace, where there are good opportunities, and if there's something that they can do better. I think there's a continuous improvement model that Australian firms of all sizes and all natures tend to take to anything. So there's a good opportunity to come and pitch your wares, definitely.
Excellent. Great answer, David. Now, here's one that is it's a slow to medium pace bowler coming in. He's going to put this one up at about hip height, far off outside the off stump, and you can send it out through the gully to four. Is the 4 pillars policy up for negotiation under the FTA, David? Or
I'm probably the wrong person to ask, but I don't think I can imagine a time where we would do that. Because the financial...
The answer's not out.
I think the answer might be that, isn't it? Look, I can't see that happening, but I think what we are seeing, particularly from Senator Hume's office, and she's shown really strong leadership on this, and given that she is Australia's first Minister for FinTech, it probably gives you a pretty clear indication when you listen to her about what her views are. And one of the things I compare and contrast on a daily basis what's happening in the UK with what's happening here. And one of the real strengths of the UK economy is it is hyper competitive. It is a global hub for so many different industries. There are always competition, and the UK government really has, if we can't be competitive on this, why not, as a starting point. Whereas I think in Australia, we tend to sort of say, we have a bit of a reverse attitude. I mean, we sort of have 2 airlines and 2 supermarkets and 4 banks, and and we're a bit worried that we don't want to lose any of those. But I think the reality, particularly in financial services, and I've got to be careful what I say because the big 4 banks are all members of ours as well as others. But I think there is an opportunity, certainly in, we've seen the likes of Volt and Judo Bank and 86400, and there's a new one, Infinity, starting up in Queensland at the moment, a UK founder. There's some great opportunities you don't have to turn into the next big 4 bank to have a really solid, good business that has a good business proposition in Australia and can attract customers and make you a good sum of money and give a fantastic customer experience. And what we know is that we've seen the Royal Commission into the banking and financial services sector in Australia. It hasn't all been pretty. There are things that we need to address. So the opportunities to come over here and either pinch market share or, as I said at the outset, or to help some of these big banks actually do their own job better, there's some great opportunities there, certainly. And I think the great thing from a UK perspective is they went through that sort of mess at the global financial crisis, which is really a large part of the response from Prime Minister Cameron and Chancellor Osborne at the time was really, okay, how do we help fix this? And FinTech was really given a real boost at that time by the support from the central government, supported by industry, and that's really helped it take off. And there are things that we can certainly learn from the UK.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, the next question goes to Justin. Actually, no, sorry, it goes to Michael, but it's a follow-on from one of Justin's points earlier. The City of London, the square mile, has its own rules and it's separate to the rest of the UK for a number of reasons, has its own regulation or access, and it's not actually part of the EU. We'd have to fact check that one, but I think this question is actually maybe right. Does that mean that companies based in the square mile have some advantages that those outside don't? Michael?
Yeah, look, I don't think that's quite correct. And the the City of London is, is a local government area, if you like, and there are, it has some specificities, but the advantages it had are market advantages. You just have the sheer concentration of businesses and scale and talent and innovation in literally that square mile or whatever it is in the strict sense of the word. So no, there are no advantage. I mean, it's part of the UK. It's not separate in any real sense. It's got its own traditions and all the rest of it, but it's very much. And we've had the Lord Mayor visit Australia in person and virtually over the last few years, and and the Lord Mayor traditionally is sort of an ambassador for the financial services sector as a whole for the UK. Doesn't just speak for the City of London, but the big financial services sector in other cities like Leeds or Edinburgh. It's very much industry as a whole approach. So they don't really have any great advantages from the sort of jurisdictional point of view, but in terms of sheer concentration of scale and talent and all the rest of it, of course, there's a natural. That's why it's such a magnet. People want to be there. People want to do business there.
Now, the four-letter word called tax has come into the discussion. Are tax changes part of the free trade negotiations? And I suspect that question's focusing on the financial services sector. Most free trade agreements have some sort of tax implications. David, is there anything that you're aware of that our participants may need to know about?
Yeah, look, I think the short answer is no, it doesn't have direct impact on taxes. On tariffs and those sorts of things, yes, but it doesn't mean that suddenly we'll get a better corporate tax rate in the UK, or and there are some impediments that we know, and we're pushing for the Australian government to reconsider its withholding tax, for example, to try and make a funds passport really valuable and worthwhile to pursue as part of these arrangements. So no, it doesn't directly affect it, because the taxation law is a domestic piece and it's not part of this trading arrangement. But the great thing about FTAs is you can apply a lot of pressure to governments about, well, you could make it really attractive for a lot more UK investment into Australia if you just remove that withholding tax. And look, there are trade-offs, right? So the short answer is no, but the longer answer is there's opportunities to put pressure on government to reconsider their current thinking and the way things are.
Excellent.
And Andrew, just to maybe to add to what David said, all of which is totally correct. I mean, so FTAs are very, very complicated beasts. They normally have a fairly consistent structure to them. As I said earlier, people may think they're the answer to every single issue in trading. They're absolutely not. They're generally focused on a series of technical agreements that cover sometimes market access, but usually are mainly focused on tariffs and things like that. But tax is usually out of scope largely, and tax is usually regulated by double taxation agreements separately. So you would expect that, as David rightly says, I mean, there is some pressure to reconsider tax in the context of an FTA, but it's usually negotiated separately and often subsequently to the FTA.
Excellent. I think before we wrap up this session, I might highlight that in today's Financial Review, there's a great story here by John Keogh. I know John quite well, and he's written a great story about why Sydney might finally challenge Hong Kong as a financial hub. And the point is, he's highlighting that Sydney and Australia might take this opportunity while Hong Kong is going through a lot of uncertainties to try and make putting your head office in the region much more friendly here in Australia. So I think the point there is that John's making is that we've got a lot of opportunity in front of us here in Australia, and particularly in Sydney or even Melbourne. I'm sure the case is the same for Melbourne. That a lot of people probably don't realise when they're sitting in London and thinking, well, I know Australia well, but it's not Hong Kong or Singapore. I think that maybe people should be rethinking that. So anyway, last question is, how can the cohort contact you should they have any additional questions? What's the easiest way to get in contact with you, David?
The easiest way is just to send us an email. If you go to britishchamber.com, you can find my email address there, or it's just dmccready, DMCCREDIE @britishchamber.com.
Fantastic. And Dan?
Yeah, likewise, similarly, old school email is the most convenient. I'm happy to make my email address available to all the participants, as well as a couple of my team members that are on the call with us as well. Obviously, you can find us on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn often means it's a little bit of extra work, copy and paste. But more than happy for people to contact me on LinkedIn. And in addition, I'm a little bit of a refusenik when it comes to some other forms of social media, but you can find me on Instagram. But probably LinkedIn or email are the best ways.
Excellent. And Justin, you've just looked up the super pool's just ticked over $3 trillion. That's a real achievement there. I think that's a large pool of money.
It's a market that's probably worth looking at with regard to technology. 3 trillion
Indeed.
can buy a lot.
Indeed. Look, one other way that you can get in contact with our speakers is through Liz Wood, which is liz.wood at newfound.global. She's the coordinator of all the information in this event. She's doing a fantastic job. But look, I think without any further questions, I think now's the time to wrap up what has been a fantastic panel. You guys have really done a great job in disseminating what's going on, and I think giving our participants a great insight as to the hard work that's going on into this free trade agreement. But the other point I was making at the end, this is just the beginning. The government has really shown, both governments on both sides of the world have shown their keen ambition to make this free trade agreement start to come together and the bridge work. And that's the important thing. So great attitude and great work from both sides. I'd like to thank you all for your time, Justin, for putting this panel together. And thank you for giving us your time tonight or this morning, as the case may be. And I know that the attendees have got a lot out of this. Thank you so much. And I look forward to meeting you soon at some stage, ideally in person next year. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Justin.
Thanks, Michael, Dan, David, and thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
So that just leaves me the opportunity to wrap up today's session. I think it was just an outstanding session today. We've heard from great speakers in the regulatory and now the free trade space. And thank all the speakers for putting their hard work and time and energy and access for the participants. Next week, we start on Monday, again, 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is 7 a.m., I think, in the UK. We're working on next week's sessions is building your commercial strategy, developing your approach, getting ready to scale, and then an eye on fundraising and also a path to exit. It's 8 a.m. UK time for the formal start, I've been told. So keep your mind for those different sessions. There's some great speakers again. I think this week has just been outstanding. And I'd like to thank the Newfound people again, Claire and the team at Newfound. They've been excellent, and also the partners. And if you've got any further questions, just go to liz.wood at newfound.global, or you can contact us through the website at Newfound. That's great. Participants, I hope you enjoyed it that much. Look forward to the weekend, but look forward to seeing you again on Monday. So thank you very much, all the speakers, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday next week. Good night and good morning.